Iran warned Israel on Thursday against retaliating for its missile barrage on October the 1st. That's as Israel ramped up its offensive in Lebanon against Tehran-backed Hezbollah. Iran carried out the attack following Israeli airstrikes on their allied militants. The commander of Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards, Hossein Salami, gave his warning at the funeral of a deputy, also killed in Israeli strikes.
We say it now, and you are aware that when we say it, we take action. Be careful not to make a mistake again. If you do and target us in any way, whether in the region or in Iran, we will strike you in a painful manner again.
As Israel plans its response, there are fears of a wider Middle East conflict. US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin spoke with Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on Wednesday with aims to avert a regional war. But Israel shows no signs of easing its campaign against Hezbollah. Its military said it had killed 45 militant fighters in Lebanon in the last 24 hours. In Gaza, medics said on Thursday that Israeli airstrikes had killed over 10 Palestinians in Gaza City. Meanwhile, Israeli forces sent tanks into Jabalia in the north, where Palestinians and United Nations officials expressed alarm over shortages of food and medicine.
With early voting underway in many states ahead of the November 5th election, Republicans are filing lawsuits across the country to challenge potential losses for Donald Trump. George Mason University political science professor Jennifer Victor explains.
There are a number of challenges to things like voter registration and various laws and regulations about election administration, and calling into question what counts as a valid vote, who counts as a valid voter, and a lot of consternation and worry about how people participate and who is participating.
Republicans are involved in 130 lawsuits they say aim to make sure votes are counted properly and that people don't vote illegally, after Trump in 2020 falsely claimed his defeat to President Joe Biden was marred by fraud.
This was a fraudulent election.
But Victor points out that after the voting itself is done, there are safeguards in place to ensure January 6, 2025 does not look like 4 years earlier, when Trump supporters stormed the Capitol in an attempt to overturn his election defeat.
Congress passed the Electoral Count Votes Act not long after January 6th that did a couple of things, including clarified what happens on January 6th. It clarified that January 6th is really just sort of a pro forma, almost ceremonial kind of function, and that it clarified the role of the vice president, that the vice president really holds no authority in that situation.
The votes for president of the United States are as follows.
Before the Electoral Count Votes Act became law, and as you might recall, as things unfolded on January 6th, it used to be the case that one or two people could raise an objection to a slate of electors. Now the threshold for raising objections is quite a bit higher. So it'll be very difficult. You would have to build almost a majority coalition among the members of Congress in the House and or the Senate in order to raise the same kind of objections.
In a statement this week, the campaign of Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris said, quote, "The 2020 election was free, fair, and secure, and Democrats are making sure that 2024 is the same."
Yahya Sinwar has been killed by Israeli troops, according to Israel on Thursday. Sinwar was the mastermind of the October 7th, 2023 attack that triggered the Gaza war. His killing is a huge success for Israel and a pivotal event in the year-long conflict. There are a number of possible scenarios for what happens next. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the war will go on. The Israeli military said it had killed Sinwar in an operation in the southern Gaza Strip on Wednesday. There was no immediate comment from Hamas. Families of the Israeli and foreign hostages still held in Gaza welcomed the news about Sinwar, but repeated their call for a deal to bring the hostages home. Sinwar was named as Hamas's overall leader following the assassination of political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July. He was believed to be hiding in tunnels Hamas has built under Gaza over the past 2 decades. His death could dial up hostilities in the Middle East, where the prospect of an even wider conflict has grown. Israel has launched a ground campaign in Lebanon over the past month and is now planning a response to an October 1st missile attack carried out by Iran, ally of Hamas and Lebanon's Hezbollah. But the death of the man who planned the attack last year, in which fighters killed 1,200 people in Israel and captured more than 250 hostages, could also help push forward stalled efforts to end the war he triggered, which has killed more than 42,000 Palestinians. The Secret Service is in need of fundamental reform, according to an independent review into the first assassination attempt on Donald Trump. It said the agency had become bureaucratic and complacent. President Joe Biden's administration launched the probe, and the findings were released Thursday, which stated without change, incidents like that will happen again.
Take a look at what happened.
On July 13th, Trump, who is the Republican candidate in the November 5th presidential election, narrowly escaped being shot in the head in Butler, Pennsylvania by a bullet that grazed his ear. The near miss exposed serious security gaps and led to widespread criticism of the Secret Service. Its director resigned over the incident. The investigative panel cited a lack of ownership by experienced senior-level personnel, a lack of cohesion in security planning, and a lack of clarity regarding who was in charge of the site. Recommendations include overhead surveillance for outdoor events with presidential candidates, and ensuring that at least one representative from the Secret Service and each state and local law enforcement agency are together at the communications hub. It said many of its recommendations should be put into place by March of next year.
In Gaza, a few miles can be enough distance to separate an entire family. That's what happened to the Abu Sakran family. A year ago, 13-year-old Maher Abu Sakran left his family in Gaza City to help his grandparents flee from the north of the Strip in search of safety. It was a trip that was only meant to last a few days. But soon after his departure, Israel's ground incursion into the enclave began. Maher is now in Deir al-Balah. While relatively close to his family, he can't get back.
It's enough war, enough checkpoints. I want to go back to Gaza City. I want to see my siblings and mum and dad and my brother. And God willing, we will go back to our house and go back to Gaza City. It's enough killing. It's enough killing of people. God willing, we will go back to our houses safe. It's enough of rockets falling on us, and we've had enough of living in tents.
Maher has stayed with his grandparents. He can only communicate with his parents and siblings by telephone. His mother, Asma, worries about how her son is coping, being away from them all.
I miss my son Maher a lot. My son was young when he went to the south. He misses us, and we miss him, and we wish he was with us during this time. And you know, when a boy is young and far away from his family, far away from his mother, far away from his father, and far away from his siblings, what happens? He's always anxious, scared, and unwell.
Israel's plans for the future of Gaza are unclear. That's beyond its stated aim of dismantling Hamas as a military and governing force and recovering Israeli hostages. From the makeshift tent he now calls a home, Maher remembers happier times when he could eat with his immediate family or they would go to the beach. It's enough killing. It's enough killing of people, he says.
The Dow registered its fourth record high in 5 days on Thursday after stronger than expected monthly retail sales and a chip stock rally powered by Taiwan Semiconductor's upbeat forecast. The Dow added more than 0.33%, while the S&P 500 and Nasdaq ended essentially flat. Shares of Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, the world's largest contract chip maker, gained nearly 10% after the company beat Wall Street estimates for profit and forecast a jump in fourth quarter revenue driven by demand for artificial intelligence chips. That helped propel other chip stocks, including AI trade favorite and TSMC customer, NVIDIA. The chip rally came just days after a downbeat forecast from chip equipment maker ASML sparked a global stock sell-off. Mike Muscio is president of FBB Capital Partners.
I think we're in a cycle of high-quality businesses that are priced for kind of perfection to be in a position where, based on the current earnings report for the prior quarter, and then importantly, guidance going forward is going to make a difference. And we've seen you have two great examples in the same sector of one that was down, 10+% and one that was up 10% on that earnings number. So there's some idiosyncratic things going on with each of those companies, kind of very different, though in the same industry. And I think this is a good reminder for investors to be monitoring not only what they're invested in, but what their position sizing is on the other side of these moves and whether or not they should be rebalancing.
In other movers, shares of Netflix, down 2% at the close, rose more than 3% in after-hours trading after the streaming service said it picked up 5.1 million subscribers in the third quarter, topping Wall Street estimates by more than 1 million users. And shares of Travelers Companies and Blackstone Group both advanced after the insurer and the money manager posted third-quarter profit, which beat market expectations.
China's wobbly economic recovery just got a little more uncertain. Figures out Friday showed growth falling to its slowest pace since early last year. The world's second-largest economy grew 4.6% over July to September, a little better than forecast, but still down on the previous quarter. Property remains among the big problems. The real estate sector has been in crisis for years, with big developers weighed down by debts and struggling to complete apartments. Other numbers out Friday showed home prices falling at their fastest pace since 2015. Policymakers have announced a series of stimulus measures in response.
是年底前将白名单项目的信贷规模
The latest came a day earlier, with promises of more support for the property sector. But many investors say China's focus on boosting infrastructure and manufacturing is no longer enough. They want to see measures to stimulate consumption and warn the country will struggle to hit this year's 5% growth target without major action. Speaking to Reuters on Thursday, International Monetary Fund Chief Kristalina Georgieva added to calls for change.
We did some analysis on what would happen if China undertakes structural reforms. Well, that can lift up China's medium-term growth quite significantly. Otherwise, they risk to fall below 4%. And that is going to be very difficult for China. It's going to be very difficult also from a social standpoint.
Last week, China's finance minister promised to significantly increase debt to help drive growth. But he left investors guessing on the size and detail of any new package. Local media reports later claimed that Beijing would raise around $850 billion through new bonds to fund fiscal stimulus. China's blue-chip stock index initially fell following Friday's numbers, but later reversed course to gain over 3%. The jump came after the country's central bank launched two schemes to pump money into equities. It said that was meant to aid the steady development of capital markets.
Two Asian chip-making giants had a Friday to remember, but for different reasons. Taiwan's TSMC saw shares rocket to record levels, but Samsung had a disappointing day. Investors were excited after TSMC posted forecast-beating earnings for the third quarter the day before. It reported a 54% jump in quarterly profit beyond analyst projections. The world's largest chip maker for other companies also gave a strong outlook for artificial intelligence demand. Its shares closed up almost 5% Friday, beating a record set earlier this year. TSMC counts Apple and Nvidia among its customers and has benefited from a surge in AI's popularity. It's now Asia's most valuable company, worth around $874 billion. Rival Samsung had a very different feel on Friday. Sources said the South Korean giant postponed taking deliveries of chip-making equipment from Dutch firm ASML. The sources added the machines were supposed to be delivered to Samsung's upcoming factory in Texas, but they said the firm has yet to win any major customers for the project. The delay is a blow to the ambitions of Chairman J.Y. Lee to expand beyond memory chips into contract chip manufacturing. TSMC dominates the market, and the gulf with Samsung could be widening as the Taiwanese firm ramps up production.
U.S. retail sales increased more than expected in September, another sign that economic growth remains strong in the third quarter. A report from the Commerce Department out Thursday showed sharp increases in receipts at retailers ranging from clothing outlets to bookstores, grocers to gardening centers. Online sales jumped, as did receipts at bars and restaurants. Economists view dining out as a key indicator of household finances. Lower fuel prices likely helped put more money in consumers' pockets. Data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration showed gasoline dropped by about 12 cents per gallon between August and September. Spending is being underpinned in part by solid income growth. Though labor market momentum has slowed, layoffs remain historically low, which supports wage gains. Signs of the economy's resilience will likely not discourage the Federal Reserve from lowering interest rates again next month, but will cement expectations for a smaller quarter-point cut.
The European Central Bank cut interest rates for the third time this year on Thursday. It reduced the deposit rate by 25 basis points to 3.25%, its first back-to-back cut in 13 years. ECB President Christine Lagarde.
The incoming information on inflation shows that the disinflationary process is well on track. The inflation outlook is also affected by recent downside surprises in indicators of economic activity. Meanwhile, financing conditions remain restrictive.
The move looks like an acknowledgement inflation could settle around the ECB's 2% target faster than thought. A cut was widely expected as policymakers had made the case for quicker easing in the run-up to Thursday's meeting. They cited a series of weak growth readings and stable inflation data. Poor sentiment indicators, weak consumer spending and a prolonged industrial recession suggest the bloc is barely growing. That has put downward pressure on inflation, which slowed to 1.7% last month, its lowest level in 3 years. The ECB gave no clues about its next move, although markets expect similar cuts at each of its next 3 meetings. Policy hawks are still likely to oppose quick rate cuts given inflation could tick up in the coming months. They argue the labour market remains tight, energy costs are volatile, and services prices are still rising quickly. It suggests, in their view, domestic inflation could be relatively high for some time to come. But Doves argue growth is now so weak the ECB should act quickly to shore up the bloc. They fear inflation could fall below target, and the ECB would have to go from fighting rapid price growth to excessively low inflation.
U.S. retail sales increased more than expected in September, another sign that economic growth remains strong in the third quarter. A report from the Commerce Department out Thursday showed sharp increases in receipts at retailers ranging from clothing outlets to bookstores, grocers to gardening centers. Online sales jumped, as did receipts at bars and restaurants. Economists view dining out as a key indicator of household finances. Lower fuel prices likely helped put more money in consumers' pockets. Data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration showed gasoline dropped by about 12 cents per gallon between August and September. Spending is being underpinned in part by solid income growth. Though labor market momentum has slowed, layoffs remain historically low, which supports wage gains. Signs of the economy's resilience will likely not discourage the Federal Reserve from lowering interest rates again next month, but will cement expectations for a smaller quarter-point cut.
Saya akan catat mau mobil jiwa. Sama gitu.